Where we are today is a good percentage of the workforce, leaders and team members, are all claiming that they're experiencing burnout.
We're approaching the end of the calendar year as we're recording today's episode. And if you're like a lot of business owners I've been talking to, you are feeling absolutely exhausted, drained, and can't wait for the holiday period so that you can just refresh and rewind. Now, there's a lot of reasons why we're feeling so exhausted and worn out, and just, so many things have been at play here. But there's got to be a better way, a way forward. And as always, we like to get the experts in to help us. So I'm an accountant. I'm Paul Sweeney, hosting the Business Behind Your Business podcast, but I'm not going to profess to be an expert in this topic. And that's why we've got Trudy MacDonald from Talent Code HR with us today. And Trudy's got a lot of experience in this area and working with boards, leaders, leadership teams over the past 20 years, but also across many different industries and countries I've seen. Has been the CEO of at least 3 companies herself, well sought after as a speaker on these topics. And I've just been reading some of the testimonials and feedback from some pretty impressive organisations across Australia and New Zealand. I won't go in because we'll be here all day. But certainly Trudy comes to us with a lot of experience talking about these ideas of leadership, from how do you encourage a high performance team, particularly when we're all feeling so, I guess, burnt out, which is the topic we're looking at. But where the angle Trudy's coming from is from that organisational psychology framework, which will actually help give some structure around identifying the issue we're talking about, and also some solutions for how we move forward. So Trudy, welcome to the microphone. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you, Paul. Such a pleasure to be here and talking about such an important topic for so many leaders at the moment.
Absolutely. And look, I think we can't escape it, because everywhere I go and every conversation I have with a business owner or somebody affected by a business owner, or even a key person in a team, a leadership team, that feeling of being completely exhausted and burnt out always comes to the surface. It's like we can't escape it at the moment. So I'm just wondering, how have we got to this situation?
Yeah, I think that's such an important question. So, Paul, COVID happened, as we all remember, but COVID actually changed something really important for all of us as a working population. It changed our mindsets, and it changed our mindsets around how we perceive work and how much we want to lean into work, because many of us, particularly those of us who have been around for a while, we may have reflected and found that we were just on the work treadmill. We were working long hours, and it was day after day after day. And even though we always talked about work-life balance, COVID, I think, was the wake-up call that made us realize that we're quite vulnerable. There's more to life than just work. And it was during this post-COVID period that I saw so many business owners and leaders and senior people within organizations actually stepping out of the workforce and moving to remote locations, or changing their work situation, moving from full-time to part-time, for example, or even setting up their own gigs, because they were really seeking that balance. But to answer your question more directly, I think the media's been really fantastic over the last 4 years or so to put these big buzzwords on different phases that the workforce went through. And I think it's quite useful to reflect on those, because it paints a really powerful picture around how we got to where we are today. And you're absolutely spot on. Most people that I engage with have either experienced burnout, or they're feeling exhausted and burnt out right now. And I think for business owners particularly, this is really challenging, not only in terms of our own energy and being able to continue to drive and lead people in a very different environment to what it was 4 or so years ago, but as importantly, we're trying to mobilize our workforce and get them to be more productive and more accountable. But if you've got half of your workforce who are screaming burnout, it's very difficult to ask them to do more. So to paint that picture for you very quickly, we started with what the media dubbed the Great Resignation, and that's where people were leaving the workforce, silly amounts of money were being thrown around, and people were really starting to think about what they value most in the work experience. Now, that very quickly took us to what was dubbed the not so great resignation. And that's where a lot of the workforce was moving for greater sums of money. However, when they got to the other side and they were being paid more money, what they probably didn't really think through was that more was going to be expected of them. So many individuals started to rebound, and we saw this boomeranging effect where the not so great resignation was dubbed. So that led us into an era where many people were happy to stay with their employers, but the term the great renegotiation was then hitting the headlines. And what that meant is people were staying, but they weren't necessarily satisfied. They were wanting more money. They were wanting more flexibility. They were wanting permanent work from home arrangements. And we may recall that was a particularly tumultuous time where leaders were struggling with the concept of fairness. How do I allow this person more flexibility and not this person? What does this actually mean for us? So then, fast forward to about 2 years ago, and what was dubbed the Great Exhaustion started to hit the headlines. And there were two things happening at during this period. The term quiet quitting started to become something that we all heard about. And what that basically means is people were change fatigued. There'd been a lot of change in their personal life, there'd been a lot of changes in the workplace, and they were basically saying to their leaders, just stop, just let us get back to some normality for a little bit. And subsequently, a lot of people were really disengaged. They were coming to work, they were simply going through the motions. But the concept of a high performance workforce was really starting to become a thing of the past for many organizations. But the term the great exhaustion really started to reflect that on a global basis, research was coming out that very large percentages of the workforce were actually claiming burnout. So the numbers across Australia about 2 years ago were sitting just under 50%, which is such a wake up call for many of us to think that half of our workforce was self reporting burnout. Now, those numbers have just started to drop a little bit in the last year. So we're currently sitting at about 38%, but it's still so significantly high. So where are we today, right now, towards the end of 2024? The term resenteeism has been dubbed, and I think this is a really interesting one. What it basically reflects is that employees are happy to stay where they're employed. Job security is actually more important now than ever before because there's been so many organisational changes and the economy's been quite tough in many industries. However, they're resenting their employers. And what they're resenting is that many leaders are trying to get people back into the office on a more permanent basis. And they're basically saying, well, I've proven to you that I can work from home. What are you doing trying to get me back? And they're also resenting the fact that they're working harder in their minds and not necessarily getting rewarded or remunerated for that. So it's been a really interesting journey. But in summary, where we are today is a good percentage of the workforce, leaders and team members, are all claiming that they're experiencing burnout.
Yeah, and that's pretty widespread and pretty damaging because when you put numbers on it, and you said 38%, we've dropped to 38%, which sounds better than 50%. But if you put that in terms of headcount, if you've got a team of 5 people, then at any time, two of those team members are suffering from burnout. Now, obviously, we've got a duty of care to look after those people, but we
Yeah.
also have to manage the expectations of the rest of the team with how do we manage this? And it's a complicated situation. And I don't think there's a lot of business owners out there that actually have the skill or the training to identify this or manage it.
Yeah, you're spot on. And I think it's quite useful to just define for a moment what does burnout actually look like? Because it is self reported. It's useful to think about three different elements to it. The first are the physical symptoms. So if you're feeling fatigued, you've got no energy, you find that you're just dragging yourself to work, that may be associated with burnout. There's the cognitive symptoms, and this is where you might feel as though you're just being pulled from pillar to post and you don't have any clear headspace at all to be thinking into the future, to be innovating, to be working on strategy. And I think that's particularly important for leaders because it's such an important part of their role. And then the third element is the social aspect. So I was talking to a leader just yesterday who was actually in tears with me in a one-on-one situation. And for me, it was all of those symptoms of burnout. And what she said is, when I go home, I can't even connect and engage with my family. And I think, if people are feeling that way, that they're just so caught up on this treadmill, that they're not even enjoying the things in life that create real purpose and meaning for them, that's when you know you're experiencing burnout. I do a lot of executive coaching, and I coach CEOs and boards. And for the first time in my career over the last 2 years, I've had more leaders of businesses say to me, I'm not sure that I can do this anymore. I'm just exhausted.
Yeah. I'm just looking at the observation in my own industry, so the accounting industry, and my engagement with other professionals who have just been really, in the past, you would describe them as the most positive and upbeat individuals, but of late, when you engage with them, you can see the effects of the past 4 years have really taken their toll, and you
Yeah.
don't see that positivity anymore. Um, and there is a lot more concern. And I know, just monitoring our team and the clients from different industries, one of the biggest problems is that they're reporting that they don't have the energy to function or to change things in their business. So if you're sort of
Yeah.
feeling that you can't do any more, how are you going to move your team forward? How are you going to encourage your team to become, I guess, high performers when we need that?
Yes.
But if we're in a position where we're struggling ourselves, there's got to be some challenges there in encouraging the rest of your team to be high performing when you don't feel like you're high performing yourself.
Yes, you're spot on, Paul. And you know what? I started to observe this in my work, and I got really curious around what was driving it, because my passion is high performance organizations, and everything we're talking about goes against what it means to be a high performer. We need a leader, like you've just articulated, who's future focused, who's focusing in on their people, who can actually create the vision and guide their team into the future. And if leaders aren't feeling that way, we've got a barrier straight away. But the other thing I've observed is a lot of leaders are now putting pressure on their teams, or there's boards in some instances that are putting pressures on the leadership team to just put COVID behind them and to move on. And we need to rebuild these sustainable high performance workforces. And I got really curious around what was underpinning this, because one of my observations was across the country in the last few years, I have seen more investment in health and well-being initiatives than ever before in my career. Organizations have been really generous in terms of leaning in, providing support for their people, whether that be through flexible work arrangements, additional benefits, just having conversations, and the level of empathy that now comes into one-on-one conversations around your personal situation, and how can we look after you. However, despite that, the burnout numbers keep going up. So this is where I got really curious around what the root cause of these major issues really are.
So I'm just wondering, because you talked about how more and more people are still resenting coming back into like an office environment because they
Yeah.
can work from home.
Yes.
But I'm thinking that it's very hard to get I guess a team building or a team working together when you've got such a disjointed environment. Because when everybody was working from home, everybody was on the same playing field. But now you've got some back in the office and
Yes.
some not, and but the days that they're in the office don't match up. So how? That seems a bit of a struggle on how you manage that.
Yeah, it's particularly complex. And I think leaders in the last few years have really been struggling with, how do we get the balance right? And I'm not sure anybody's really got it right. But an interesting case is Amazon announced just a few months ago globally that from January 1st, 2025, all employees globally are back in the office 100% of the time. So they've obviously looked at that as a leadership team and said, you know what, it's not working. We're going to take make a bold decision here and actually bring everybody back. However, my personal view is that hybrid and remote work is actually here to stay. If you look at the major job boards and the nature of jobs that have been advertised and the percentage of people who are applying for those hybrid and remote jobs, it greatly exceeds the jobs that have been advertised. So, from an employee perspective, people want the flexibility, they want hybrid. And I think you're right, Paul. We've proven that we can work in a hybrid situation. I think the leadership challenge is, how do we make it work? How do we make it effective so we can build high performance teams? And you're spot on. So some of the scenarios I see is the classic 3 days a week in the office, 2 days at home, or vice versa. However, the nature of the work people need to do is actually another variable that's often not taken into account. So I see the classic case of individuals who need to do deep work, um, particularly important in the accounting industry, right? I just need to concentrate and get this done. They're forced to come into the office. And with all good intentions, we've now got an open plan workspace and they can't get any work done because they're getting disrupted all the time. So then they have to go home after work and do their work, and that's breeding resentment, as you can imagine. But the reverse is that people lock themselves up at home. They might engage superficially via Teams or Zoom, but you're not actually getting that connection. So back to your earlier point, what are the root causes? And it's interesting that hybrid and remote work is actually one of the root causes of why we're experiencing burnout. And there's a few others, however, it could be worth just exploring that one for a moment.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's dive into it because I know that this is me guessing here, but I noticed a lot of people have said that they found it very hard to switch off when they were working from home in that hybrid situation from when they were working to when they're not. Now, for
Yes.
me, during COVID, and I'm not a person that likes working from home, I'll be upfront and honest about that. I like being in the office. But for me, during COVID, I would use a trigger in terms of I would wear a business shirt while I was working, and then I'd go and
Yes.
get changed to signify to myself, but also to my kids, that I've finished work. I'm now available for them. But I see a lot of people who struggle with that, being able to disconnect from work and engage with family or friends or in a social context because
Yeah.
the lines are blurred too much.
Absolutely. And we're always on, right? So in Australia, as we know, legislation has recently been introduced, which has been named the right to disconnect. And I think that's an attempt to try and manage that. However, at the end of the day, it's up to individuals in your culture to really reinforce how we can disconnect at the appropriate times. And I love your idea there. It's almost creating a new persona for yourself. I change what I'm wearing, and now I signal to everybody that it's time to be dad, or it's time to be a partner, or I'm now going to engage in some exercise. I'm actually switching off from the workday. One of the as I got curious about this, and I started to recognize that hybrid and remote work was contributing to burnout. The root cause underpinning this is actually the lack of connection and the lack of belonging between individuals when we're not physically in the same workplace. And it's fascinating if you look at the psychology behind this. So if you can imagine that you've got individuals working from home, and as you mentioned, Paul, they're not disconnecting because the laptop's always on the kitchen bench, and the watch is buzzing and the phone's buzzing. So we're not disconnecting. However, if we don't have those deep relationships with others in our team or across the organization, what happens is the issues and the stress starts to compound because we're not sharing the issues, we're not problem solving, we're not connecting with others, and others they don't have the opportunity to lean in and say, hey, can I help you here? So it's actually one of the root causes of burnout. We don't have the deep connections and relationships that we did previously when we came into the office. So, as leaders, I think there's some really practical things we can do around this to mitigate against that. Because, as I mentioned, I don't think remote and hybrid is going away. It's here to stay. We need to lead differently. And one of the really practical things you can do is to create space for people to connect when they're working remotely. And when I'm talking about connecting, not just coming together in a virtual meeting, but creating space within your agenda to actually check in with each other and to get to know each other as human beings, not just transacting and flying through the agenda. So, a few really simple things that you could incorporate into your virtual meeting agendas is, first of all, sharing around the room, what's my number? Now, what I mean by that is it's everybody actually sharing a number from 1 to 10 that reflects how they're feeling right now. So it might be, you know what, today I'm a 6. I'm having a few challenges with my family at the moment, or today I'm a 6 because I'm feeling that the workload's getting a little overwhelming. Just sharing that is so incredibly powerful because the follow-up agenda items can then be, what's my focus for today? Which gives everybody a sense of, okay, I'm doing something here that's meaningful, but then where do I need help? And if you can facilitate that either in a daily huddle or as part of a weekly meeting, straight away you start to facilitate connections that may not have been there previously.
Mm. And that's going to be a challenge, particularly I'm thinking of people like myself. And when I say like myself, I'm saying male business owners over the age of 50, because I think we, particularly as a demographic, struggle with this concept of that social engagement and actually
Yeah.
reaching out. I think we tend to be the people that struggle a lot with it. And when you look at the proportion of business owners in Australia, a lot of them are over 50, male, struggling with this. So I think we've got we've identified one key target. Well, I have.
Yeah.
But it is something that doesn't come naturally for a lot of leaders. And I think it's something that I'm not seeing has been part of that whole leadership training or management training process, because I think it's still very new to us all.
Yeah, you're spot on. And Paul, it actually brings up a broader question. And I think this is one of the other root causes of burnout, which is what it means to be leading now in 2024 is very different to what it was 4 years ago. But even that's so different to what it was 10 years ago. And some of the capabilities that are absolutely non-negotiable now. And you're absolutely right. Many leaders are struggling with this. Is number one, emotional intelligence, and what that means is we need to have empathy for what's going on in other people's lives. We need to be able to respond to that. And we need to be very conscious of how we show up as leaders and how we make other people feel, because our employees have a choice. And if they're not comfortable with that type of leadership, there are so many options to them out there. So, emotional intelligence is one of the key elements. The other, which is equally important, is this concept of psychological safety. And what that means is within the team environment, every single individual, regardless of their role, feels safe taking interpersonal risks without fear of repercussions. And what that means is they can be their authentic self. They can contribute ideas even into somebody else's patch. They don't feel as though they've got to get back into their patch. They can challenge the status quo and share ideas, and they can give feedback, knowing that others aren't going to get defensive and they'll actually take on board their ideas. So, as a leader, being able to create that environment in the context that half of your team might be working remotely on any given day is absolutely critical. And the third key capability is actually accountability. And this leads to the next root cause of burnout, which is, my observation is that many leaders have actually lent into their employee base with high levels of empathy in the last few years. We've actually been better at that than we possibly realize. We're having conversations with people, we're checking in with them, we're making sure they're okay. And there's been a lot of work done in the mental health space, I think, to get people comfortable with those conversations. However, what's happened is the balance between empathy and accountability is now out of whack. And specifically, my observation is many leaders have lost their accountability muscle. They've stopped using it, it's got weak, empathy has taken over, and now we've got a situation where we're tolerating people being comfortable, we're tolerating suboptimal performance, we've become so empathetic, we're no longer holding people accountable for what high performance actually looks like. And in many ways, that's actually contributing to burnout. Because as we know, if you've got just one poor performer in the team, others need to step in, they need to compensate, and the whole system just breaks down at the end of the day.
Mm. Yeah. Yes, I'm just hearing that accountability issue. because I know that we've been told to be more empathetic. We've been told to look out and take more care of our employees because they are our most valuable asset. We've been
Yes.
told to try and work for that work life balance, which was so great. COVID forced them to actually take a fresh look at that and say, well, hey, I am working too much. But that accountability issue is something that I think yeah, as you say, we have let go of it, and without an accountability, I guess also, yeah, what is the level of performance we expect from people, and why are we judging them when we haven't been clear about what levels are expected?
Yeah, you're spot on. So we've got this accountability balance, but you're right. If we go back to the root cause of this, role clarity has actually become an issue as well. And what I've observed over the past few years is with the talent shortages, many teams were not fully resourced. So as a result, leaders did what they had to do, which is they rolled up their sleeves and they got in with the troops and they did what they needed to do to get the job done. And that's fantastic. That's what needed to happen. However, for many leaders, they've created new habits and they've created an expectation around what they will take on versus what they expect others to take on. So, this phenomena of role compression is something that I'm seeing many leaders struggling with over the past few years. They've started doing parts of other people's jobs. Maybe they're having the accountability conversations with teams below them, teams of teams, rather than actually coaching and supporting and holding the managers accountable for actually leading their teams. Maybe they're doing admin work, for example, that's not a great use of their time, but they're scared to delegate that to somebody else because they're screaming burnout. So this concept of doing a reset and starting to just stand back and ask as a leader, and it's important we start with our roles, what should I be doing that's going to take the organization forward? And as we know, more time working on the business, less time working in the business, but redefining that very specifically. What are my objectives? What are my key results? And how do they link to the organization? And then looking at those who report into you, your leadership or your management team, and asking, what does it mean to be a great manager or leader as we go into 2025? And with that, let's talk about what we're going to stop doing and what we can strip out of our roles so we can really focus on the things that matter. And then you start to cascade that down through the organization. With that often comes the opportunity to delegate, which is not punishment. It means that you're growing people and creating opportunities to elevate their careers. There may be opportunities to automate some of the things that you're doing manually, or there may be opportunities to outsource. And I think what's really interesting here is if you're going to engage with a fully remote workforce, it actually begs the question, does that workforce need to sit in my local area? Does it need to sit in Australia, or actually could it sit anywhere around the world? So I think there's a good case for bringing people into the office. But if they're not going to be in the office, maybe we need to rethink some of those opportunities around where our remote workforces actually sit.
I'm enjoying this conversation, but I'm also conscious of the fact that for a business owner,
Mm,
where they've identified that they are actually part of or a cause of the problem, they're
yes.
not necessarily the right person to identify what needs to be done to fix this
Yeah.
solution. So, how would somebody, where would they go to get help? Obviously, I'm looking at
Mm.
yourself, that you should contact Trudy at Talent Code HR. But what would be the steps that a leader should take to start this process of, I guess, healing this situation?
Yeah. So if we go right back to the root causes here, I think there's a few really practical things that business owners can do. First of all, make sure they've got a clear business strategy in place. And that's going to be your framework to define the role of the leader to say, what should I be focused on? Because as a business, we need to execute on this strategy. From there, one of the most practical things they can do is engage their team in a reset. And if we're looking at any change to roles or our ways of working, we all know it's so critical to get our team on board with that change. We can't just ask them to do things, it needs to be their idea as well. So, getting your team offsite for a day, positioning to them that we're going to do a reset in preparation for the next year or the next period, because our ways of working are not sustainable. We've achieved so many incredible things and we've got more incredible things to achieve, but we need to do this in a sustainable way. If that's the framing, then you can actually bring your team together at those offsites to engage in a discussion around what's working really well that we can do more of. So let's double down on those things. Even better if, so what could we be doing differently? And then as a team, actually come up with our new ways of working. And to your point, Paul, sometimes as a leader, it's worth sitting in that conversation rather than facilitating it. And subsequently, I've facilitated tens of dozens of these. And what tends to come out of them is, first of all, the issue of role clarity. And you start to get the team having a powerful conversation around where can they create value, but where's the noise and where's the distraction? And how do we get rid of that? How do we delegate it? How do we stop doing it? So, really powerful. The second thing that often comes up is a conversation around accountability. And I can give you some tips for listeners in a moment around how accountability has shifted, which I think is really important. The third thing that often comes up is meetings. So, if you've got a meeting rich culture, at the end of the day, we want to get hours back into our days for everybody. So, do all meetings have to go for an hour? Probably not. Does everybody have to be at the meeting? Probably not. What's the purpose of the meeting? What's the agenda? What are the outcomes? And many meetings are infomercials, which means it's just a one-way sharing of information. Let's stop those. That can be reported in a different way. How do we use those meetings as opportunities for connection and collaboration? And then the fourth thing that often comes up in those resets is decision making. And I like to think about the concept of two-way door decisions and one-way door decisions. So if you can imagine that you as a leader make a decision, you go through the door, oops, that was a bad decision. The door swings back the other way. So you can actually reverse that decision. That's okay. These are the types of decisions that we should be empowering our team members to make. So often I find that those decisions have bubbled up to leaders. We actually need to push them back down and empower people. But then you've got one-way door decisions, and that's where we make a decision, you go through the door, oops, that was a bad decision, but that door doesn't go back the other way. We're stuck with the decision. These are the decisions that you as a leader or the leadership team should be making. There's one practical thing that leaders can do to kickstart this process. Get the team involved in this one-day reset, and the end of any year or the start of any next period is a really great time to do that.
Yeah, I like the way you described it as a reset, because I think we're not sort of saying we've got to change everything or we've got to just completely change the focus of what we're doing, but it's a case of revisiting and just saying, right, okay, we've allowed these things to take us a different tangent that aren't core to what we're doing or they're not helping us. But what do we need to focus on? What are the things we need to stop doing, and what are the things can we do better? I'm loving that idea, and I've made some notes as we've been talking because I think that's something I'm going to be scheduling in for our team here. um, and certainly, yeah, that whole idea of just resetting and reevaluating. Where are we? What do we need to be accountable for? What do we need to be doing? And then
Yeah.
you've got that clarity, but also you've got that ownership of the whole process from all your team being involved in it.
And that's
I love.
absolutely critical. And that in itself gives people hope, because if you come out of those sessions and you've got a plan for how things are going to change, hope's a really powerful emotion. So if people are feeling burnt out, but they know things are going to change and they've been part of deciding what those changes are going to be, suddenly it can shift mindsets. The other piece I think that's quite important to talk about that leaders can do really practically is reintroduce accountability practices. And what I find often when I talk to business owners and leaders is they fear accountability. They think accountability is going to be punishment in some way and it's going to be anti the culture that they're trying to create. As you mentioned, Paul, we've really lent into the empathy, but we've lost the muscle to hold people accountable. So, where accountability has shifted is away from what I refer to as one on one combat. And that's that nasty end of year performance review where we all get all tense and here it goes. I'm going to get some feedback. And it's conflict driven. versus accountability being a team sport. And if you think about any sporting analogy, everybody knows what their role is in the team. And that's where we go back to role clarity and that reset we're talking about. Everybody also knows what everybody else's role is in the team and what they need to deliver for that team to actually win at the end of the day. So let's take those principles into the workplace, and really practically, this is how it happens. Everybody should know what they're responsible for. This is what success looks like for my role. Second thing is, I should know what everybody else in my team is responsible for and what success looks like in their roles. With that, we want to now, in a highly psychologically safe environment, which I mentioned earlier, we want to introduce a level of transparency around performance and accountability that many organizations possibly don't have. So this is where we make accountability a team sport. If you can imagine that at a weekly team meeting or a monthly team meeting, individuals will go around the table one at a time, and they will actually share with their colleagues, this is what success looks like for my role for this month or this week. This is how I'm tracking, I'm doing really well in this area, and this is what it means for you. These are the implications. But I'm struggling with this area. Can you guys help me? Or I'm struggling with this area. This is why, this is the roadblock I've come up against. Can we just brainstorm some ideas? And this is where accountability really shifts. So accountability done well, where there's high support, where we feel safe being vulnerable, where we know others are going to lean in and help us and share ideas, is actually one of the most motivating things you can do for people. It creates connection, people feel supported, and we love to achieve goals as human beings. It motivates us, it gives us energy. So if we can shift our accountability practices to being more transparent, more team-based, you'll find that that's going to shift you towards being a high-performance culture. It's going to shift people out of that comfort zone that many people are stuck in, but it's actually going to enhance your culture significantly.
Well, that's great. I'm really, I guess, energized after having had this conversation myself. Looking forward to putting in place some of the things that we've discussed with my own team here, and really feeling energized. But I'm just thinking there's probably I'm going to need to go back and look at for some more resources, some more guides, some more help on this. So where do I go to get that
Yeah.
help?
Yeah, absolutely. So our website is probably a good starting point. So that's talentcodehr.com.au, and you'll see that the broader range of services there, which cover incentive scheme design, because we also need to be rewarding our high performers, and that's an important part of mitigating against burnout as well. It's about leadership development. It's about shifting cultures. So that's all there. I'm on LinkedIn, so you can just search for Trudy MacDonald, and no doubt, Paul, you'll put the link in the notes. I'm also on Instagram, and that's Trudy MacDonald Leadership. And on all of those platforms, including YouTube, I regularly post short videos with really practical tips for leaders. So I'd welcome anybody to follow me or to reach out if I can support them.
Absolutely. And we will definitely be sharing those links in the show notes and on the website at the businessbehindyourbusiness.com. So reach out and have a look at some of those resources and get in touch with Trudy to help you basically take your team from a burnout culture to one of absolute brilliance and high performance. And look, I've really enjoyed our conversation today. I'm sure that you have as well. I encourage you to have a closer look at this topic and really look after your team, but more importantly, look after yourself as a leader, because it starts with you. And I'm really grateful for Trudy and the time that she's given us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. It's been a pleasure.
That's a wrap for this episode of The Business Behind Your Business. We hope you found today's discussion insightful and valuable for your business journey. Before we go, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. Share it with fellow business owners who could benefit, and send in your burning questions, because we love hearing from you. Missed any of our previous episodes or looking for additional resources to help grow your business? Head over to our website at thebusinessbehindyourbusiness.com. There you'll find our full archive of past episodes, along with show notes, transcripts, and links to valuable resources mentioned in each episode. Your journey to business success continues at thebusinessbehindyourbusiness.com. Until next time, stay inspired, stay informed, and keep building the business of your dreams.